This guy is a gem to talk to. He should have made movies with Mae West because he's got one-liners just like she did. So here he is, Mr. Lew Bracker.
Get comfortable. I do have a few things to say. First of all, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here again. But then again, it's an honor and a pleasure to wake up every morning. Today, we're celebrating Jimmy's life for the 63rd year. I call it a celebration, and that's why I'm wearing my happy hat. Two weeks ago, I celebrated my 90th birthday, and I'm going to come back to that. I only mention that because I'm going to come back to that later. Actually, I don't feel a day over 89. We call this a memorial, but does anyone in this room need any help remembering Jimmy Dean? For me personally, this event has become a gathering of family and friends of James Dean from all over the world. We meet, we greet, happy to see faces we haven't seen in a while or even ever. We eat, we dance, we parade, all in celebration of Jimmy's life. And we remember. We remember a day in September when grass was green and corn was yellow. And we were two young and callow fellows. I've had the honor of speaking at some of these gatherings. I've spoken about my friendship with Jimmy. I've spoken about Mildred, Jimmy's mother. I've spoken about Hortense and Mark and Marky, Jimmy's Fairmont family. And yes, last time I was here, I spoke about Fairmont and her people. Someone I haven't talked about much, or if ever, particularly here in Fairmont. I haven't talked about me. And I'm referring to the me of 1954 and 1955. I've mentioned myself in interviews and such, but I haven't talked about it. I'm going to do some of that today. And while I say I'm going to talk about me, obviously I'm talking about Jimmy and me. Along the way, I'm going to relate some things and opinions I've never talked about or wrote about. In some cases, due to the fact that the memories simply didn't come to the surface while I was writing my book. And before I get to that, I brought something with me that I've had for 63 years. I took this off Jimmy's desk on October 2nd, 1956. I've had it for 63 years. I'm leaving it with Marcus for his archives. It's time. This is an interview in the Los Angeles Times dated November 7th, 1954. It was on top of Jimmy's desk almost a year later. That can only mean he liked it, he was very comfortable with it, he wanted to keep it. I'm not going to read you the article. I'm going to read you Jimmy's quotes, in which he gives some of himself, a real rarity. And excuse me, but I'm going to read so that you get every word. This is, in a great sense, this is Jimmy talking to you. Quote, I'm a serious-minded and intense little devil, terribly gauche, and so tense, I don't see how people stay in the same room with me. I know I wouldn't tolerate myself. Quote, people were telling me I behaved like Brando before I knew who Brando was. I am not disturbed by the comparison, nor am I flattered. I have my own personal rebellions and don't have to rely on Brando's. However, it's true, I am constantly reminding people of it. People see only the end result and compare it with the last commercial success that comes to mind. They discover resemblances. We are both from farms, dress as we please, ride motorcycles, and work for Alec Guinness. As an actor, I have no desire to behave like Brando, and I don't attempt to. Nevertheless, it's very difficult not to be impressed, not to carry the image of a highly successful actor who is, so to speak, from the same school. I find, however, that the more I work, the less I have the tendency to fall back on Brandoism. Within myself are expressions just as valid or more valid, and I'll have a few years to develop my own, what shall I say, style. On East of Eden, quote, I read the script. It's excellent. A very good movie. Strangely foreign. Kazan has really caught it this time. I read the script by Paula Osborne, a very simple, very direct approach to the book. And the character is one I warmed up to very quickly. I felt sympathetic associations, felt very close. I considered it a great challenge to reveal honestly the things in this part that were of myself. Most actors wear a mask in order not to reveal themselves. This is easy. It is easy to show what a character is going through, but hard to do it. As Kazan often says, don't show me, do it. On his role in East of Eden, a hero who is humanly demonic. The picture is a study in dualities, that it is necessary to arrive at goodness through a sense of the satanic rather than the puritanic. Another quote. I hate anything that limits progress or growth. I hate institutions that do this, a way of acting that limits a way of thinking. And a final quote. Geographical location means nothing to me, and neither did coming out here. A man can produce no matter where he is. I have a picture deal with Warner's, and it is a good contract. I am quite happy with it the way it is. That's from Jimmy himself. The past couple of months, I've been asking myself, who was that guy? Meaning me, of course. What did Jimmy see and feel in Lew Bracker that I wasn't aware of at the time? In order to come up with some answers, I've had to travel back 63 years. But I'm better equipped to do that with perspective of age. Now, for the first time, I want to tell you before we get any further, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, but we did stay at the Holiday Inn Express while we were here. I believe, one answer, or part of an answer, as I see it, was the fact that I was and am a very good listener. I heard my dad talking loud and clear when he told me at a young age, you're not learning a thing if you're the one doing the talking. I believe Jimmy recognized and connected with that fact, and he really liked that part of my character. I believe that Jimmy used it, which was fine with me. A prime example being the lunch meeting I wrote about in my book, Jimmy and Me, when director George Stevens and producer Henry Ginsberg scheduled a lunch meeting with Jimmy to ensure Jimmy would do their film, Giant. This story makes my point, but in the book, I really told it from Jimmy's standpoint, not from mine. One mid-morning, Jimmy called me at my place of work and asked me to come out to Warner's and have lunch. There was nothing unusual in this. Jimmy did this frequently. He just liked to shoot the breeze with me, and so I naturally gave the request very little thought. I want to say something here that has gone unsaid all these years. Jimmy told me nothing in advance. He told me, come out and have lunch. That was it. He did not tell me anyone else was going to be there. He did not tell me this was an important meeting for him. It follows that Jimmy gave me no hint on why I was there or how he would like me to act. In retrospect, Jimmy just knew. Jimmy knew I would size up the situation quickly and act accordingly. Jimmy was using me to distract these two Hollywood biggies and take control of the meeting. I was Jimmy's red herring, and he knew I would just sit there silently for 2 hours and look important. Jimmy just knew. Was I being used? Of course, but knowingly. Jimmy and I were playing a game on Hollywood. Jimmy loved it, and I was happy to be part of it. Incidentally, you'll be interested to know that once that meeting was over, Jimmy and I never discussed it. He never said a word about it. I never said a word about it. We knew what we'd done. And when Jimmy asked me to meet him at the Villa Capri restaurant at 6 o'clock one summer day, well, I knew that was unusual because we never read anywhere at 6 o'clock. It's not something we did. So I wasn't really surprised when I got there and his agent, Dick Clayton, was there, and I found out for the first time we're going to a sneak preview of Rebel Without a Cause in Huntington Park, California, a LA suburb. And Jimmy knew I would sit through the film stoically, silent, not say a word, and sit next to him in the theater manager's office afterwards while the studio executives went through the preview audience response cards, not say a word or ask a question. He just knew and he trusted me. As for me, I was far more interested in concentrating on the Warner guys, their whispering and their body language. I didn't have to read any response cards to know what Rebel was. Another scenario along these lines was the night Jimmy dragged me kicking and screaming to an acting class that Jimmy just wanted to sit in on. We went along with us was Lenny and Adele Rosenman and Lois Smith. And it was run by veteran character actor Jeff Corey. Of course, Jeff Corey and his entire class, assuming I was another Broadway actor because I was with Lois and Jimmy, and one of note, of course. And as usual, I just sat there watching everything and everybody, not saying a word. After the class, Jeff asked Jimmy if he wanted to join the class, and Jimmy declined. So Jeff turned to me and asked me if I wanted to join. And I just said, not at this time. Jimmy knew I wouldn't spill the beans, and he had that smirk on his face. Jimmy loved practical jokes. He loved playing a game on Hollywood, and he used me to do that, and that was great. I have always enjoyed watching people. I'm a people watcher. When I travel, I watch people. I sit in lobbies and watch people. After all, who's more interesting than people? I believe this is another part of me that Jimmy connected with. Jimmy and I observed and listened to people. Jimmy motivated by his craft. As for me, I believe it is because deep down I knew I could write and I would become a writer. One of the scenarios I've talked about is my first meeting with James Dean. And I want to give you a little more detailed, clearer picture of that meeting. Lenny Rosenman and I had been friends since 1947, well before either of us knew Jimmy Dean. And Lenny Rosenman had come out to do the music for East of Eden, and when he got to LA, he called me. He wanted me to come over to Warner's and have lunch and catch up on stuff and all of that. And so on the appointed day, I showed up at the green room. And there was another guy there, and Lenny turns and says, "This is James Dean." He could have just easily said, "This is John Doe." The name James Dean didn't mean a thing to me, and he didn't register as someone I should have heard of. Growing up in LA and going to school with child actors and children of Hollywood luminaries, I wasn't particularly impressed with Hollywood actors in any case. So being introduced to one who I'd never heard of, didn't exactly excite me. Yet Jimmy the person did. He even intrigued me. I was aware of Jimmy studying us intently. As Lenny and I were happy to see each other and were busy laughing and catching up and making irreverent jokes about Hollywood, Jimmy could see that we were genuine in our friendship. I think a genuine friendship was intriguing to Jimmy. And he noticed our cynical jokes. I noticed Jimmy's very wary, defensive attitude. The way he slouched in a corner of the booth, opposite Lenny and me, with his left leg up along the bench, taking up the rest of the booth, and in my opinion, daring anyone to sit there. I was aware that Jimmy did not join in the conversation for quite a while. He sat there taking in Lenny and I laughing, two good friends who liked each other. I think it was about an hour of this before Jimmy felt he could dip his toe into the water, reveal a little bit of himself by interjecting a cynical remark. I had asked a rhetorical question to no one in particular. Why do they call this place the Green Room? And Jimmy shot back, because everyone in this room is jealous of everyone else. Those were the first words Jimmy ever spoke to me besides hi, and the first crack in the ice. Jimmy was filming East of Eden, and Pierre Angeli was on the lot filming a Hollywood epic, The Silver Chalice, co-starring another newcomer from Broadway, Paul Newman. As most of you know, Paul lost out to Jimmy for the role of Cal in East of Eden. So in comes Paul Newman for lunch. He spots us and comes over to the booth. Paul seemed like a nice guy. He had that famous smile on his face, but he was obviously self-conscious, probably embarrassed because he's in full Roman regalia with a skirt. And Jimmy had that smirk on his face. I read it as almost triumphant, and I felt he acted a little condescendingly. At that time, I wasn't privy to any of the background about Eden with Jimmy and Paul. But don't let anyone ever tell you that actors aren't competitive. The media has referred to me as everything from Jimmy's insurance man to his closest friend. I was never really Jimmy's insurance man. I just happened to be in the insurance business when I met him. I did become his closest friend, and as such, I saw a need to get the personal part of his life organized, things that Jimmy had very little interest in. For instance, Jimmy wanted to return to racing, and he needed a certificate form signed by a doctor. Jimmy didn't even know a doctor. So I put him together with our family doctor. Jimmy needed a businessman later on in 55, a business manager to handle his bills and stuff, particularly with a big new contract being written. So I put him together with a business management firm that handled some of Hollywood's biggest people. I was not and did not want to be Jimmy's manager. I simply helped my friend in these areas. Jimmy had a distaste for taking care of responsibilities. He hated details not related to his craft. My late close friend Joe Himes, author and newspaper columnist, said I was Jimmy's mentor. I never thought that. The late great filmmaker Robert Altman, whose first feature-length film was the James Dean story, he had a different take. One morning we were having breakfast in Castilla, California on the way to the crash site to film a recreation of that. And Bob asked me, why do you think Jimmy and you became so close? Why did Jimmy allow himself to become so close? And I said, well, trust. And Bob said, no, it's much more than that. And I quote, you were his rock, his center. When things got too crazy, he gravitated to you for stability. I think that was closer to the mark. Me, my family support. Actually, Jimmy thought he was my mentor. He thought he was my protector. And who was he protecting me from? He was protecting me against the female natives of Hollywood. I mean, please, can we talk? I grew up in Hollywood. I spent 3 years in the Army, 18 months of those in a war zone. I was almost a year and a half older. I never pointed any of this out to him. Jimmy wouldn't lift a finger to help me date a Hollywood cutie. His Quaker upbringing in Fairmont only applied to me. Didn't apply to him. Jimmy was afraid I might succumb to the feminine wiles and, horror of horrors, marry one of these sirens. At the same time, Jimmy was dating him like it was going to become illegal tomorrow. A case in point, one Sunday in August, post Ursula Andress, we were up at the pool. One of the rare times I had invited a female guest. She was actually from a well-to-do Jewish family, but she was all about Hollywood. My term was Hollywood wise. She had a slim dancer's build, except for a world-class superstructure. And she was Hollywood wise, as I said, and oh yes, I was her insurance man. I really had no romantic interest in her, but I was friends with her family. Jimmy wasn't taking any chances. A moment when we were alone, Jimmy asked me if I thought she was interested in me. I said I had no idea. I should have said no. So Jimmy said he could find out in a hurry if it was okay with me. I said, sure. I should have told him again that I had no interest. Some minutes later, Jimmy returns, and he has that smirk on his face and said, she has no interest in you, like it was new. I said, how do you know? He said, I just hinted that I might call her for a date, and she practically jumped out of her bikini. Jimmy had the look on his face of a job well done. He had protected me from the evil clutches of Hollywood's most predatory animal, the starlet. Another side to Jimmy was his shyness. One day, having lunch in the green room, Jimmy's day-to-day agent, Dick Clayton, came by the table, and Jimmy had an interest in dating a Hollywood starlet, Virginia Leith. Now, Eden had been released, and the word was out on Rebel. So Jimmy could have got a date with any single girl in Hollywood, and some married ones as well. All he had to do was pick up the phone. Yet Jimmy said to Dick, "Will you phone her and set it up?" Jimmy had a shyness side, and well, I'm going to put this in here. I went through all three films with Jimmy. I went from him being nothing or a nobody to the hottest star in the world. He never changed one iota. Never to me, to my family. If anything, he became more common, if that's the right word, more normal. So I just think that when people think of James Dean, they don't think of shyness, and they mistake shyness for rudeness. And I said in here earlier, Jimmy just knew. They just don't know. After the accident, I did not consciously embark on any sort of debunking mission. I really just wanted to be left alone. It started after Dennis Stock and I returned from the funeral to the media circus that was going on in LA and around the world. A highly rated local TV night show asked me to come on, and I refused. But Dennis urged me to accept on the theory that I could set some of the records straight. I went on that show, and I suppose I began my official career as the James Dean debunker. In the ensuing years, it just seemed right for me to grab every opportunity to set the record straight regarding who Jimmy was. Throughout the years, I've had many opportunities to do that, and with the advent of the internet, my debunking mission has become almost a full-time job. Perspective is a wonderful asset, and unfortunately it comes only with the experience of age. So armed with that perspective, I look back on the summer of '55 with clear realizations. Maybe it wasn't our Camelot, although it seems like it to me. But it was the beginning of Jimmy beginning to open up, like a flower bud into a blossom. Perhaps that's too flowery, no pun intended. But Jimmy was beginning to let himself be Jimmy. It was also the time when Jimmy began to take control of his film career, taking it out of the hands of people he didn't even like. In 1955 Hollywood, it was the time of the cusp. Old Hollywood was slowly becoming new Hollywood, where stars made their own deals and were not dictated to by the studios, and the period was not without its clashes. I speak specifically of the film Giant. Giant was instrumental in that it forced Jimmy to become the rebel with a cause. Old Hollywood directors were, for the most part, dictators on the set. To Jimmy, that was simply unacceptable. George Stevens tried to make Jimmy knuckle under to his discipline, and Jimmy, knuckling under to nobody, left the set after work on a Friday and simply did not go back for Saturday morning. As far as the studio, his agent on the ground, Dick Clayton, George Stevens, and everyone else was concerned, Jimmy had disappeared. As far as my family was concerned, Jimmy was spending the weekend hanging out at our house and pool. Warners and Dick Clayton were frantic, calling all over LA, trying to find him. Nobody thought of me, and they didn't even have our number. Jimmy had forewarned me and my folks that they might call looking for him, so Jimmy and my family were involved in his little conspiracy. Meanwhile, Jimmy relaxed at our pool the entire weekend until Sunday night, when he felt it was time to call his agent for a meeting at Warner's on Monday, a meeting where he came out the winner. But this wasn't just about how Jimmy wanted to be treated. This was about Jimmy coming of age in Hollywood and within himself. This was Jimmy's Magna Carta, his Declaration of Independence. It was Jimmy saying, I'm going to make films, but no one is going to tell me how to act or disrespect me. Much has been written, even by Alec Guinness himself, about the night Jimmy, Alec Guinness, and I have to say, had dinner together. I have rethought that evening, scrutinized it really, as I have the entire 18 months of Jimmy and me for this talk, and realized that some aspects never made it into the book. While Jimmy was fascinated in talking to Alec Guinness, and certainly picking his brain, because that is what Jimmy did, I can see now that this was the closest I ever saw Jimmy to being a fan. I don't mean a fan to the I want your autograph type. But I mean it in the sense that Jimmy was thrilled and excited to talk to a fellow actor the stature of Alec Guinness, and of whom he had so much respect. Another memory that floated to the surface while concentrating on that night, what did they talk about? Comedy. Alec Guinness's earlier films, The Man in the White Suit, The Lavender Hill Mob. Comedy without trying to be funny. Fascinated Jimmy about those films. Films without pratfalls. Situational comedies, and how Sir Alec underplayed his role for comedic effect. Jimmy wanted to do a comedy sooner rather than later. Yes, Jimmy did show Alec his new Spider. And yes, Alec did warn him never to drive the car. I can attest, Alec was very shaken by that incident. It occurred to me also that no one really asked me what I did during this meeting between two of the world's greatest living actors. So here it is. I was an avid listener. I listened and I observed. I knew that this night was about Jimmy and Sir Alec Guinness meeting for the first and only time. And fate blessed me and placed me there to bear witness. I'm going to comment on a few things floating around in the James Dean mythology that I heretofore refrained from doing, but on which I've always had my own opinions. One regards Liz Taylor and her book, published many years after the accident. Because of my close friendship with Joe Hymes, I knew firsthand the pressures that a publisher can put on an author to spice up the book they are writing. Therefore, I attribute this particular piece of what I can only call juicy gossip to that pressure. In the book, ghostwritten no doubt, Liz talks about how close she was to Jimmy and hence his confession to her. So I'm going to leave this subject with a question for you. Would anyone who really knew Jimmy give him a cat? It's like, here, Jimmy, here's a gift you don't want and can't wait to get rid of. He just got rid of a horse. Another episode in Jimmy's life that I want to comment on regards Dick Davalos, who you all know played Jimmy's brother in Eden. I knew Dick. We were friends and we went out a few nights, particularly while Jimmy was in Texas. I've said before and often, my friends were my friends, regardless of Jimmy. Dick Davalos was a very nice guy and he had enough personality. My feeling is that this was really something about between two actors. Competitive to a point, but as I stated, Dick had an outgoing personality in 1954. Jimmy did not. He was very defensive. Maybe it was a clash of personalities. They shared an apartment when they first came out. But I've never heard Jimmy unhappy about Dick's acting ability, as he was with other co-stars. In the beginning, Jimmy and Dick shared an apartment across from Warner's, along with the Rosamans and Lois Smith. They were all in one corner. I used to call it the Eden corner. I wrote my opinion of Rebel in Jimmy and Me. I haven't changed my opinion. I called the set the dark set and even the dark movie. History seems to have confirmed that. They are all gone. The set itself was a mirror of its young cast, the exception being Jimmy, who was the idol of them all. I can describe the set in a few words: jealousy, idolatry, a very destructive form of competitiveness having nothing to do with acting, and a complete misunderstanding of Jimmy's mental approach to his individual movie families. Emotionally, Rebel was troubled waters without a bridge. Only Jimmy was not involved, but he was the unwitting cause. A contest to be considered his best friend. A contest without a winner, but booby prizes of disappointment and frustration. One more thing to set straight. Jimmy was in love with Pierre Angeli. Jimmy was never in love with Ursula Andress. Jimmy would have married Pierre. He would not marry Ursula. And that, folks, is why Ursula bolted. When Pierre left, Jimmy was heartbroken. When Ursula left, Jimmy just moved on. I was there. I noticed no remorse or sense of loss on Jimmy's part. And regardless of what some have claimed, Jimmy was never, ever closer to marriage than he was with Pierre Angeli. Being an Orthodox fatalist, I don't look for answers to unanswerable questions. It is my opinion that things happen because they are supposed to happen. When tragedy strikes, we all ask why. Why this, why that? Many turn to religion for an answer when our life is cut short. We ask why. We may get some comfort, but we never get an answer. Religion will tell us that it was God's will. To me, God and fate are one and the same. In Jimmy's case, I have my own answer as to why Jimmy's life ended suddenly. I won't presume to argue my answer with anyone here or anywhere else for that matter. This is my answer for me to the question of why. It was fate's master plan, fate or God. This was the time, and Jimmy was the instrument. It was ordained that it was time for a comet to flash across the sky named James Dean. A comet proclaiming to the world, and especially to the younger people of the world, look at me. Look at me, I am all of you. I am your needs, your wants, your fears, your angst, your hopes, and your dreams. I shout to the world on your behalf. Look at us. Understand us. Love us. And his voice has not been stilled. It is heard the world over, year after year. Jimmy's funeral service included the words of one of America's greatest poets, Edna St. Vincent Millay, who wrote about burning the candle at both ends, but oh, what a light it gave. Jimmy did not burn the candle at both ends. He burned it at one end, but oh, what a light he gave. For my part, fate granted me a long life, and I now feel that that was part of the plan, to stay behind and educate all those I could reach and correct all those who would tell us they knew the real Jimmy Dean. Only those who knew the real Jimmy Dean were really close to Jimmy feel no need to go around convincing people they knew the real Jimmy Dean. Now, I'm going to relate something to you, something I can't believe was not burning in my memory at the top and made a part of the book Jimmy and Me. Obviously, it burned in my memory. It simply didn't want to rise to the top until I was scrutinizing everything once again. It has to do with the day we took Cisco to the ranch. Before we get to that, I want to admit that in examining that day, I became aware of other things that went on in the car with Jimmy. When I met up with Jimmy at Pickwick Stables down the road from Warner's to hook up my convertible to the horse trailer, only in Hollywood, a convertible pulling a horse trailer, so we could transport Cisco to the ranch, I now realize that Jimmy was anxious to get going. I would say he was even a little hyper or tense, maybe both. He wanted to get that responsibility off his back. However, on the way home, after leaving Cisco at the ranch with the ranch hands, Jimmy was very relaxed, even giddy, and friendlier than ever, asking me all sorts of questions about my family and me personally. I now know that Jimmy's great attitude and relaxation in the car coming home was not all due to putting Cisco on the ranch. Jimmy had obviously been doing a lot of thinking and had come to, for him, a very important personal decision that turned out to be a very important decision for me as well. As I was about to get into my car, Jimmy turned to look right at me and asked a question. On the face of it, an innocuous question, and it even could pass for small talk. But for Jimmy, this question represented a major commitment. And I see now that it was the tipping point in our relationship. It was Jimmy Dean having reached a point of commitment and declaring himself all in. So what was this question to me that cemented our relationship? It was very simply, do you like Italian food? At that time, in my mind, I thought he was inviting me to dinner as a courtesy because of taking over Cisco. But that wasn't what the question was about. Jimmy was replacing any remaining trace of suspicion with trust. He was replacing a friendly acquaintanceship with a true friendship. Jimmy was inviting me into his inner sanctum, the Villa Capri, and into his private life. How could I bury this memory so deep? Yes, things proceeded that day that drew Jimmy and I closer together as friends. However, I now know that that was the moment when Lew Bracker and James Dean became close friends, brothers, according to Jimmy. Do you like Italian food? On these words, a great friendship was forged. In conclusion, I turn to the lyrics of one of my favorite songs ever since I first heard it in a Broadway show in 1941. I want to explain that in that show, this song was sung by an aging man in love with a young girl, expressing a sense of urgency about his remaining time on earth. I saw a different connotation, and I want to apply that connotation now. I want to assure my family, the Winslows, and all my friends here and around the world that this is not about urgency. It is about a promise and a commitment to go on doing what I've been doing for 63 years. For it's a long, long time from May to December. And the days grow short when you reach September. But these few precious years I'll spend with you, these precious years I'll spend with you. Thank you and God bless.